Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening. Welcome all to the old Management Muse. Jeff Tumlin here with my co-host and wife, Cindy.
Hello, everybody.
Talk today about management errors. I have a funny feeling that this won't be our only podcast on management errors, but we'll start with the story of a time that Cindy and I were on vacation, going to Hawaii, like we try to go when we can. And we're walking back. We just had a really good dinner. I think we were on the old person special at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse.
We do like to edge out the buses with the senior citizens.
We do. We're seats.
Competitors for the 5 p.m. slot.
That's right. We steal the seats from the seniors. And so we were finishing our dinner at whatever time, probably 6 we were done. And we're walking back towards the hotel. And we stop, and there's this beautiful picture of lavender fields. Just probably one of the most amazing images I've ever seen. And it was in I guess it was an art gallery, really a gallery that displayed photographs. I don't think either one of us had ever seen something like that. Mm-hmm. But we were feeling pretty good and lured inside by this beautiful field of lavender. And we went from kind of one picture to another of these just extraordinary seascapes, mountain pictures. And
trees, lots of tree pictures.
Yeah, lots of trees. And then we stopped in front of a set of winter birches that somehow had blooms of red. I don't know.
Yeah, it was very stunning. It was quite a contrast.
Yep.
It was like white and black, and then it was like leaves of, red, bright red.
It's amazing. Yeah. And so we're basically sitting there, and the question was to us was basically, how do we get this amazing picture to Texas, where we were living at the time? How are we going to make this happen? Because it's that beautiful. And sure enough, about this time, a salesperson came up. They're very inconspicuous, except right at the moment of purchase. They are materialized. And we said, look, hey, can we get this picture, to Texas? And they're like, oh, yes, absolutely. That's part of the whole deal and the way we do it. And then Cindy asked, well, how much does it cost? And the person said, well, it's $11,000. And Cindy and I both looked at each other, and we were pretty seriously, I think, at that point, contemplating, look, we need this thing. This is beautiful. We've never seen anything like it. They can ship it to Texas. It's all
and I think also we were feeding off of each other.
There was a little bit of that.
Yeah. If he thinks it's okay, it's probably okay, because I know he's cheap.
Yeah. So I think, okay, all right, we can do this. We can make this happen. And in contemplating this, I looked down at my feet, and I realized I'm in flip-flops and a pair of shorts, and that image of my nasty feet and my shorts kind of brought me back to reality. If I just basically had cheaped out and elbowed the seniors out of Ruth's Chris to get, the $34 special, because, we like to get a good value.
We also like to eat early.
And then no sooner than did I finish my $34 special at Ruth's Chris for the early bird, I walk across the street, and we're about to spend $11,000 on a picture we'd never seen before from an artist we'd never heard of before. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is question substitution. We were guilty of substituting an easier question, do I want this, for a harder question, should I purchase this? And that's a kind of substitution that happens all the time. And it's the main kind of management error that we want to talk about today. Our brain is amazing in so many ways. It basically, as soon as it can, it makes everything that we know how to do automatic, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. Whether that's driving, cooking, brushing your teeth, any one of a multitude of things that we do, the brain turns and makes it automatic and basically says, well, we're going to free up more space for you to do other stuff. And as a part of that, the brain is really sensitive to, if something hard comes along, looking for an automatic shortcut. And it's a harder question to answer of, should I purchase this print from this artist I haven't heard of at this price? There's a lot of variables.
Right. I think, the key is that you're more likely, it's not the only time, but you're more likely to fall into this bias and a whole bunch of other biases when there's a lot of uncertainty, or it's so complex that like you just you're not going to be able to actually have all the information. And so then you default into several other possibilities. Like you default to the simpler question, which may be like a substitution with like prior experience. It may be a substitution with how you're feeling emotionally. And those are the two big ones that I can think of.
Yeah.
And so instead of doing or remaining in sort of the hard work of living with the uncertainty and dealing with the complexity, you take it's automatic. You take a shortcut into the simpler answer, and you do it so fast that it feels like that you didn't take a shortcut. Like it feels like it's the answer.
Right. That was our experience kind of in the moment, is that we were critically thinking. We were actually critically thinking about this picture. Should we get it? Yeah. $11,000. And I don't think we were. I think that we had substituted, should I do this, with do I want to do this? So again, we substituted the easier, or the easier is, do I want to do this? And then the substitution is for the harder question of, should I do this?
For two people who know nothing about art really, right, other than what they like.
Right. Yeah. And then we'd also substituted the one you just mentioned of, how do I feel right now in this moment? I just had something to eat. I'm on vacation. The weather's perfect. We're in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. With, how do I feel about this painting, this $11,000? And so, as crazy as it is to think that, two otherwise people committed to making good decisions, you'd think we'd have put more thought into it. But I mean, I consider that we came fairly close to. Now, by the way, we didn't buy the thing. As soon as I looked down and saw my nasty feet, I was jolted.
We decided maybe we need to take some more time to think about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole point was I looked down and see my feet, and I'm like, wait a minute. I would have never dressed like this if I had known that at the end of the day I was going to be spending $11,000. I would have, at least put on, a pair of jeans or tennis shoes or something, not just rolled out in my beachwear to spend $11,000 on a picture, right? And so it was a great personal reminder of how an otherwise well-intentioned brain.
In two brains, yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, neither one of us are impulsive.
It reminds me of the kind of analogous case of timeshares, right?
I was thinking of timeshares when I was talking about that too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems quite similar, right? You locate a timeshare in a place where people go on vacation. They want to take some of that emotion back with them. And so it's not, how do I feel about this financial transaction? That's the harder question. How do I feel about the financial nature of this and the long-term implications? How do I feel about that? And so instead, you just substitute and you go with, how do I feel instead? And so it's kind of the old version. It's a much more nuanced version. This conversation that we're having is different from the old head versus heart, because this is easy head versus hard head.
But the easy head sometimes is using emotion as a signal on how to make the decision. And,
Right.
and very similar to the art world, like how many pieces of real estate does the average human being actually buy, and then you're on vacation and real estate's super local.
Right.
And you're diving into a piece of real estate, even if it's just a fraction of time, with basically no knowledge, no research whatsoever on the particular thing that you're buying. But then you add on that all these timeshare, not all, I shouldn't say all, because I have not been to many, but the ones that I have been to and the ones I have heard about, they are well trained on compliance tactics for influence. And so not only do you have like the normal substitution error moving you in their direction, but then they pull scarcity and social proof and a whole bunch of other things on you to try to make you feel like you have to buy it.
Places that we often go to vacation, they have, particularly Hawaii, since we were talking about that. I mean, we spend a lot of our time in Oahu, and on that island, which is where Waikiki is in Honolulu, they have almost quit making hotels, and all the new buildings that go up, there are some exceptions, are either condos or timeshares. So back to this question of question substitution, there are a lot of people who own timeshares, and a part of it, and so some people may just want to be, let's say that there's different buckets of timeshare owners. And the reason we're talking about timeshares is because I haven't read a lot of the data, but there are actually academic studies of timeshares. And the studies that I've read suggest that they're not a good decision, that you'd be better off putting your money into something else. And
again, it would totally depend on the situation, but yes.
Yes, on the particulars of what you're signing up for. But in that sense, it's helpful to just think of this as an example of an error, just like buying a photograph for $11,000 plus. That's most of the time that is going to be an error. Buying a timeshare most of the time is going to be an error, and yet there are a lot of people who do it. And so, everybody who's interested in, well, why do people do things that don't always make logical sense? But this particular kind of question substitution happens because in the face of complicated decisions, we'll often default to a simpler way of answering. And we don't know that we're doing it unless we're one of the ways to get around this is to make sure you're focusing on what the question is. Sometimes we called it like the Where's Waldo, from the kids' picture book. Where's Waldo? And so the Waldo of that moment when we were buying the picture is this picture worth $11,000? It's not that you may decide to buy it or not buy it, but what we're advocating and what we're talking about is you want to at least be addressing the main question. The question that we were addressing that day was, how do I feel right now? Well, I feel good. I just had a great dinner. We're on vacation. This thing is pretty. But that's not actually the question we should be answering. The question we should be answering is, should we pay $11,000 for a picture from a guy we've never heard of a bunch of trees we've never seen before, in that particular configuration? And that's the kind of focusing on the central question that can help you kind of retrain your brain to answer the hard question.
I think sometimes that's easier to do when there is somebody you have to explain your decision to, because and I know we're going to get into this in a second, but for instance, I've been involved in a lot of hiring of employees, and if you have to justify why you're choosing one particular person, and the justification is, well, I just feel good about that person, then you have accidentally made a decision based on a substitution error. And so I think having to vocalize your rationale for, some of these bigger, harder decisions, and recognizing when what's coming out of your mouth is really about a feeling that you had or a default assumption that you had, that brings you back into maybe thinking more deeply and then refocusing again on what the real question is. Hello, Management Musers. Today, I want to tell you about my favorite product, the Comprehensive Organizational Benchmark Report and Analysis. That's right, we call it COBRA. And if you want that bad boy to strike at the debilitating uncertainty that fuzzy estimates and half-baked guesses do to your company, and better understand the social and cultural dimensions of your organization, then give us a call or email us at culsure.com. That's culsure.com.
Now with us from the examples of the timeshare and then the buying the $11,000 pitcher, walk away from that and walk over into hiring, and you have a similar type of challenge. And so it is extremely hard for people to make good decisions about, or, there's a lot of unpredictability. Almost anybody can fake you out during an interview. Most people can fake you out for a couple interviews. And there's a ton of presentation going on, and
on both ends,
and everybody's on their best behavior. And a lot of times we don't do ourselves any favors. We jam in the interviews whenever we can. If we have a bunch to do, we do them all back to back. And so there's a kind of fatigue element that sets in. Mm-hmm. And so all of which inclines us to the hard question is some version of, will this person be successful in this job a year from now? Just if you want to kind of think out, the hard question is, will this person be successful in the job? But the easier question is, do I like this person? Or does this person look like they will be successful, sound like they will be successful in the job?
And that is more, so the, sort of, how do I feel about this person as me? Do I like this person to want to work with them is the easier question, but do they sound or look like the person is I think a good example of, it's not so much a feeling that's triggering the substitution. It's more that you have in mind a prototype, probably somebody who had the job originally, or somebody who, at least in the past, has done a really good job in that position. And this person is the one who reminds you most of them. And so you're taking an experience from the past and you're substituting it in for the present, when really, like, it's a poor substitution for making a decision. Yeah,
it's a good point. I think that, right, I have a proxy in my head. Sarah Jane, we hired Sarah Jane and she was great at this, and you remind me of Sarah Jane. Mm-hmm. Well, chances are that's going to be someone of the same gender and ethnicity
and personality,
and so
but there's so much more that goes on, intelligence and past experience and all sorts of things that might have made Sarah Jane really good at what she did that may make this next person not so good. And unfortunately, you're following probably somebody who was really liked, which is always hard to step into.
Well, it can be. Right. Well, it can be if it's it can be for that person, just because you're
not them.
Right. The old contrast effect. Maybe.
Well, it's also expectations baked in the cake, right? Like, well, Sarah Jane would be able to do this.
Right. Yeah. There's also in the way that, human interaction is so interesting. I do think that's what happens in the majority of cases, that you have to worry about, you get in your head, this is what a good blank looks like. This is what a good manager of a Verizon phone store looks like. This is what a good logistics manager at a Amazon factory looks like. You get that in your head, and then that runs you down this potentially unfortunate echo chamber of hiring more and more, whatever it is. If it's the Sarah Jane, more and more 35-year-old women of Caucasian descent, or if it's this other, it's whatever you're hiring, 45-year-old Hispanic men or whatever. And so you kind of keep doubling down on that instead of what you always talk about, which is you're better off looking for as much surface level diversity as you can get, but deep
level
similarity.
Yeah.
Right. So we want people to be similar to our organization on its shared values, the things that we say are the most important, or culture, if you like to say it like that. But we want surface level, so to speak, the things we can see, we want those to be as different as we possibly can so that we maximize the benefits of having a lot of different perspectives and viewpoints and different kinds of networks that we're bringing in to the company that we can access when we need them for problems. And then, there's obviously a rich literature on the benefits of that type of diversity and combination of factors when you bring it into an organization. But there's also the opposite. There's what the political operative David Axelrod has called the boomerang effect, where if you can identify a specific deficiency in someone, your tendency is to replace that person with the opposite. And Axelrod was talking in terms of, if we have a president, we think, well, this guy was nice, but not that smart, then the next guy we're going to hire, we don't care about him being nice, but we care about him being super smart. And then if one person is too buttoned up and robotic, then the next person we're going to get is going to be way off the cuff and just says what he or she thinks. And so it's this idea that archetyping what we think it looks like, which our brain settles into very quickly, can be extremely counterproductive, but so can the opposite. And we've seen, obviously, like everybody listening to this, we've seen errors on both sides of this. I lean too much in the direction of hiring the same old archetype I have in my head for what a good nurse looks like, what a good doctor looks like, what a good sales leader or sales manager looks like. But also the other side of it. You know what? This person just blew up. And the reason they blew up is because they didn't get around and talk to the troops. And so who is the next person we hire? The most flagrantly extroverted backslapper that we've ever seen. I mean, kind of the classic study from Baumeister, and I forget, there was a co-author on that one, but Baumeister and one of his collaborators, they studied parole decisions in the Israeli penal system. And so basically it at the time was functioning like you're on this parole board, it's you and 3 or 4 other of the good and the great, and you read a bunch of packets, and then you start at 8 in the morning and you finish at 5 p.m. And what they figured out was basically at the beginning of the day, most people up for parole had a 65% chance of being paroled. But that number, as it approached lunch, went to basically 0. And then after lunch... It wasn't
a difference in situation.
No, because they studied this across multiple parole boards, multiple days. And so basically, in the morning, 65% chance of being paroled. Just before lunch, 0%. After lunch, back to 65. And then just before, toward the end of the day, as they're getting tired again, it goes back to 0. And it was this... there were many, many, many other studies that Baumeister did to kind of confirm this idea that your willpower, your ability to focus your attention and make what we would call critical decisions, make decent decisions, tends to be constrained by basically, are you tired? Are you hungry? And how many decisions have you already made?
Like you had mentioned earlier that people are so busy in organizations that they usually wait until they basically reserve a day and then they jam in all the interviews.
Right.
And so, if you look at willpower, then basically as you go through the day, before lunch, the people before lunch are basically going to be a no. Because the default generally is I'm overwhelmed, I'm depleted, I just want to get to lunch. And so
it's safer.
It's safer. It's a safer
Right.
decision. And so, you're probably not giving those people actually a fair shot. And then the same thing happens in the afternoon. Whereas, like, really, the hiring should be spaced. It's like one of the most important decisions that you make. It's very costly to keep hiring people. So really, it should be done during, like, your prime brain willpower time. But you could also flip it on the person who's being interviewed, where instead of, they come back 3 times, 3 separate days, where they're presumably rested and at their best for 3 separate interviews. Well, you could literally structure the interview where you are intentionally running out their willpower by handing them off to other people throughout the day. So that way you get around some of the self-monitoring. Because by the end of the day, when their willpower is a little bit less, then they are more likely to actually show who they are. And then you might actually have a better shot at being able to really feel like who you might be hiring.
I think what I'm always concerned about in hiring is that anytime people are tired, hungry, or have stacked a bunch of decisions together, they're more likely to be in what Baumeister and others call decision fatigue, which tends to cause us to shortcut.
And then this is the shortcut.
There's 2 shortcuts. Yeah, you just have the first one. The first shortcut is I get ultra conservative and I realize, okay, I'm tired. I'm not going to make a good decision. And so I basically say no to anything risky, or I say yes only to what's safe. And so that makes it more likely.
Well, and then the safe thing is you're more likely to be pulling from this, like, that stereotype of the person who's had that job before that you thought was great.
That's right. Yeah, let's just pick another Sarah Jane, or let's just pick another Jim Bob, or whatever it is. And that's considered safe, even though that is a shortcut. That's me shortcutting for the harder question of there's a couple harder questions, right? The main origin harder question is what are the qualities that actually make a whatever we're talking about, a Verizon phone manager? What is it that makes somebody great at that job? And actually figuring out through some type of observational, empirical, however you're going to do it, what is it that the very best people who manage Verizon stores, what is it that they're doing? What qualities do they have? It's hard to know that, and it's hard to do the work of that. And so instead, it's easier to think, well, Jim is good, and
this person's like Jim.
Right. Yeah, and Poonam was good, and this person's like Poonam, and so let's just do it like that. And that's kind of one substitution that we've talked about. And then the other substitution is, well, it's let me just go with what I'm feeling right now. And so we're all the way back to the painting, the $11,000 painting. And so sometimes what I do is, you're exactly right, in decision fatigue, I go with the conservative path. But sometimes I flip another way and I do whatever it takes to get out of the situation. You have to be careful, because you can, instead of flipping to the conservative path, you can just flip to the path that says, whatever it takes, I'm just sick of this, let's hire this person. We never, so what? She looks good enough, it sounds good enough, let's just hire this person. And if it doesn't work, we can just do this again.
Yeah, we just need to plug the hole.
Just get me out. Not only do we need to plug the hole, but it's 5 o'clock. I've been doing this all day. I just get me out of this, and I'll do anything that it takes. We had one of the people we've worked with for a number of years was telling me, it's crazy. I can't even believe this. When I was stunned when I heard it, but it makes sense in light of what we've just been talking about. Basically, they were doing a 5-year strategic plan, and they locked everybody in the room, started at 8 o'clock, and they weren't going to let them go. And it was like 6:30, and they hadn't had dinner, and they've been in there since 8 a.m., and they've been doing like extremely hard, futuristic, like hard mental work all day. And the person describing this said what they did at the end of the day is basically the consultants leading this put together what some of the ideas had been throughout the day into like 3 things and said, is this your strategic plan? Let's vote on it. And it was unanimous. And the person telling me the story said she voted just because she wanted to go home. Like, she actually said, I would have voted for anything, but they pulled a few ideas from the day and we voted and we said, yes, this is it. This is our strategy. And that became the strategic plan. And that's like, that happens. Mm-hmm. We're going to sit in this room until we figure it. And people are like, they try, and at some point you're just done. And so it's a misnomer to think that the errors we make are only low scale, because it's absolutely possible to make big errors in question substitution. When it comes to question substitution, our brain is trying to help. It knows when something is hard, and it'll try to be helpful and give us something easier to answer instead. And it knows when we're tired, when we're hungry, when we made too many decisions in a row, and it will look for a way out for us. Sometimes the way out is to be conservative and to just go with whatever's worked before and draw on our past from that. Sometimes the easy way out is just to say yes to whatever the first opportunity, or not opportunity, the first solution that presents itself that we can get a rough consensus around.
Yeah, in other words, I think there's really 3 things that we've talked about here. There's been sort of the stereotype, the Sarah Jane, where we know this type of person did really well, and I'm sticking with jobs, but you could obviously take it elsewhere. This person did really well in this position, and so if I find somebody who's like Sarah Jane, then I'm going to take the cheat and basically extrapolate the past into the solution for today. And then there's the decision where you're just tired and your brain has probably largely stopped processing, and so you wind up sort of relying more on the people around you. And then when they present some ideas and there starts to grow a consensus in terms of like which one seems to be the good idea, you may agree to it even if you haven't really thought about it or really have any feelings about it. You know, it's sort of like what we were doing when we were in the photography store, the art store, and, you know, we were somewhat feeding off of our emotion and somewhat feeding off of each other. And I think that happens a lot in sort of these long meetings where they start presenting options, and then you kind of look around and you see what everybody else is sort of doing, and then you default to that. And then the third type is the one that I think Kahneman talked about in his book. It's one of the ones he talked about in his book, where, you know, it's an emotion. You're having an emotion, and you just feel good about this person. There's whatever it is. Yeah. Maybe they remind you of you, or maybe they're just really super funny, and, you know, whatever it is, and that emotion is leading you to make it's a shortcut to making a cognitive, rational decision. Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break. Today I'm going to tell you a little something about our strategic planning products. Did you know most companies don't have a strategy and most strategic plans aren't strategic? And that just doesn't sound right to us. We'll help you convene your core leadership team and shape a strategy and a strategic plan that's just right for your organization. We offer 6, 9, and 12 session packages led by facilitators with doctorates in management or related fields who also have decades of experience in business. We'll help you leverage your core competencies and your unique insights into a competitive advantage. Contact us at ondemandleadership.com. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
I wanted to talk about kind of the most common ways of trying not to get screwed up like this.
Sure.
And so we've talked about them throughout this conversation, but let me just list some of the main ones that usually we recommend to people here. And so the first one was kind of reminding yourself, what's the hard question, or where's Waldo?
Make sure you go back to that question. Make sure that question is stated clearly somewhere on a piece of paper for you to go back and look at.
It's, should we buy an $11,000 photograph? That's the hard question. Not do we want to, not do we feel good right now. In the case of hiring, what are the qualities that typically lead to success in this position, and does this person have them? Those are the hard questions. Is this person punctual, technically competent, and good with customers, or whatever your own criteria are? Not, this person reminds me of Janet and she did great at this job, or I just want to go home, and of the candidates we've seen today, this one seems to be the best, and so let's just extend the offer and see what happens. The other thing that I thought that you mentioned, which made a lot of sense to me, was asking yourself the question more than once. And so, whatever we're talking about, right? Hiring, the difference between a first and a second interview, almost every time we've ever done second interviews, the people who emerged at the top of the first did not emerge at the top of the second. And it makes sense. Reversion to the mean. A couple people had really good first days. A couple people are going to have really good second days. You kind of have to average that together to get a truer sense of how people are actually likely to perform. If, again, not to beat it up too much, but that word perform is tricky because we don't want to be evaluating how they perform in the interview. We want to be evaluating how they're likely to perform on the job. And those are different. Those are very different questions. The easier question is, how did they do in the interview? The harder question is, how will they do in the job 3 months from now, 6 months, 12 months? And then the last thing is try to get some another opinion or two, which you also talked about, is that often...
From fresh minds.
Yeah. Yes, from fresh minds, from people not in the room. Opinions from people burnout like you in the room, also in decision fatigue, is just going to be reinforcing. It's weirdly going to be reinforcing that you made a good decision when actually you made a bad decision.
It actually will be. Like, the tendency would be at that point to just preserve harmony.
Yeah.
And so they're more likely to go with where they think you're leaning.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this idea of commitment that you talked about of, well, we've been at this for 7 hours. We filled up all these whiteboards with notes. We've done all these exercises. Yeah, this sounds like this should be the strategy, even though it's not. It's just, it's 6 o'clock and we want to go home. And so we cobble together what a few of the main themes were, and then we say that that's the strategy, just to, if we keep with the example of the strategic thinking. I'm reminded of, I think we should end on two stories. I'm thinking of one from my life and then one from our life. I remember a really, really great guy he's actually a general right now. The general we went to is change of command.
Oh,
yeah, great guy. And I mean, we say his name. He's Ron Clark. Great guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
Love his wife too.
Yeah, Simona. Yeah, the best. I mean, just, that's the thing about, that was the thing about, being in the Army when I was in the 90s, is just really great people, a really good time, kind of post Gulf War and pre 9/11. And I remember sitting on the North Shore of Hawaii on a Saturday, having a beer with Ron and Simone and a bunch of other people, and basically had a couple tough days or tough weeks in the Army. And I was talking to Ron and I said, how do you know when you should leave? Because a couple years later, I was going to have to make the choice of if I stay or if I go in the Army. And he said, well, here's what I recommend, is that you get up and every day you feel like you need to, you fight the Army to make it better. But if too many days in a row pass and all you're doing is fighting, then maybe you start thinking if there's something else you should be doing. That you shouldn't be spending most of your days fighting the Army. You should be spending most of your days loving the Army. And what I liked about that answer is it's more thoughtful. The easier question is, how do I feel right now? Oh, I hate the Army. Oh, I don't like my job. The harder question is, well, what if I kept track? What if I kept track for 9 months and then got a rough tally? It doesn't even have to be 9 months. But what if I asked myself once a week for 6 weeks how I feel? Even that would be more likely to not be an outlier. But, I always often wonder, how often do people actually change their life based on an outlier?
I think probably with some frequency, just because the negative has so much more of an effect
Sure.
than the positive.
Yep. And then the last one, and then I'll give you the last words, is you should tell them the story about our first date.
And
how,
in what regard?
In regard to how you almost didn't show up, and because you were having a bad day. And there was a lot going on.
Yeah, I was having construction done on my house. I was having I had an overhang that was never really put on properly by the previous owners. And the roof was going on it, and I just wanted it gone because it left a lot of my house in shadow when I like light. And so I had that scheduled, and they were late, and I had been running errands, and then they showed up late. And so I didn't really have time to be prepped the way I would normally want to be prepped. And then I get down there because we're meeting in downtown San Antonio. I get down there and we're going to meet in an outdoor location, and it starts raining. And I'm like, God damn, forget this. And I wanted to cancel you so badly. But you were coming from Austin. You were already on the road. You had called and said you were going to be late. So now I'm standing or sitting in the rain, and you're going to be late. But you're already on the road, and I just couldn't do that to you. So I sat there and waited.
Yeah, the easier question is, how do I feel right now? I just want this to be over.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I just want it all to be over.
Yeah, I was just at that point, I was not interested. It's a good thing you showed up with your pretty eyes.
Yeah, I mean, the harder question is, right, is this person worth me continuing to invest time in talking to and developing a relationship? And so I'm very glad that day that you didn't succumb to the easier question.
Yep, I stuck it out, much to my benefit.
Yep. Come give your old man a little smooch.
All right, here you go.
All right, thank you. All right, that's it. You want to take them out?
I think there's just been a lot that we've talked about. I think, the big challenge with this is that so much of this happens to you automatically. And so you have to look for the flags when you are likely to be making an error, a substitution error, when you're making a mistake. And so, I think if you're talking about how somebody reminds you of somebody else, or like Geoff had mentioned, if you're trying to overcompensate for something that somebody who drove you crazy used to do, and so you found somebody with the opposite, I think if you are saying things like, I just have a good feeling, it's my gut instinct. I don't totally put gut instinct. I don't totally disregard that, because a lot of the time gut instinct is actually pattern recognition. But you need to be able to articulate better than gut instinct, or you just felt like it, the reasons why you've made the decision you've made. And then I think the last thing is just being very careful in groups, and after you've been together for a long time, and realize that you all are getting fatigued at about the same time, and that you all are interested in just making the pain end. And look for those flags. And if you see any of those flags, then maybe you postpone actually making a decision for another day or 2 days, and try to actually ground yourself in what is really happening, what you're feeling, and see if you can come up with some concrete information that might help you maybe move in a different direction.
All right.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yep.
We
Thanks
appreciate
very much.
it.
Yep.
Yep, it was a good talk.
Yep. See you next time.
All right.
The old Management Muse.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.